Okay, right. So my name's Maeve Mulholland. I'm the director of AI at SnapAttack, and today we're going to be talking about item set mining and registry. And the goal here is to, given some sort of attack, find a signature of some sort in the registry. Can we do that in an automated fashion that can be reproducible for helping threat detection engineering? So can't get either slide to advance. There we go. Okay, so what are we going to talk about? So our approach here is heavily influenced by our perspective on data and data for both traditional protection sort of within a SOC environment and for machine learning in particular. So I'm going to go over that a little bit and talk about how that led us to our approach and then this particular case study and the results. So what is the trouble with cyber data? We all kind of know the answer about this, but I'll go over it really quick. So let's start with a machine learning success. So Tesla is very high profile in their success with self-driving cars, despite some of the bad press. And one of the things they had to do is they had to learn how to detect stop signs. So to do this, they built a model by collecting data with all sorts of examples of conditions the stop signs could be in and maybe obscurations and that sort of thing. They had to pay people to label it. And then they had to monitor it to make sure, like, are we having success? How do we tweak our model to improve and so forth? And they think they're really hot stuff because they succeeded at this. But what if stop signs had legs and there was like 4 of them in the world and they didn't like being seen, right? This would be a much harder problem. You'd have the issue of like collecting enough data to do this identification would be hard. You'd never have enough examples of the variants that these stop signs could be in or their behaviors. To label these, you'd have to bring in the foremost experts in stop sign identification to be able to label these appropriately. And then monitoring would be a nightmare because how many successes are you going to have in a while to learn how to tune your algorithm, right? So clearly we're not talking about stop signs anymore. This is the problem faced by machine learning experts when they've historically been trying to do threat detection with supervised learning, and it's challenging. And a lot of people have given up because the problems are imbalanced data sets. Everything's context dependent. It's hard to get examples that have all the variants that are present in real attacks. And then labeling it, everybody's in high demand, the people who can label this data. And in terms of measuring success, right? Measuring success in this context is knowing how to protect IT infrastructure. Like you have to solve the problem to measure success in some sense. And these are the same problems that are faced by people who are doing real life IT infrastructure protection, right? Like if you're trying to detect threats using traditional or non-ML methods, you have the same issues, right? There's the expertise shortage, there's the massive amount of volume of data. When you have examples of attacks, do you understand the variants that could be present in them so you can detect them later? And then how are we protected? That question is incredibly hard, and people pay a lot of money to try and figure out, to determine, like, are our detection strategies actually protecting us and how? So the point is here, if you can get some leverage on one of those problems, it's going to solve the problem in both domains. So if you can get traction in one domain, you might get some traction in another domain. And so I'm going to talk about how we've been approaching this and how our approach to doing non-ML based threat detection engineering has given us a leverage on doing actual machine learning, and AI. So SnapAttack is a web platform that we say it's for red and blue collaboration or purple teaming. So it's a tool that helps both red and blue teams collaborate and work together. And people use it for developing threat detection strategies, doing detection engineering, trying to make better detections, and then deploying those strategies, right? And the reason it works is because we've got these 2 data sets. We've got the red and the blue data sets. On the blue side, we have all these detections. And so these detections are queries that are intended to be run over logs, and they're supposed to detect behaviors that might be suspicious or malicious or actual indicators of attacks, everything from like suspicious behavior to IOCs, right? So that's in the blue bin. And the question is always, if you have these, how do you know they work? And how do you know how they're going to behave in different contexts? So to solve that, we've built this red data set, which is examples of attacks. Each of the items in that data set is a VM session that's been logged, and it is a tightly scoped example of a particular type of attack, right? Or even behavior, right? So this is not a full kill chain or attack chain. It's just one particular type of behavior that we might be interested in detecting. And when we smash these data sets together and see what the detections hit, all of the labels on here can help on the attack side can help us tell, is that a validated hit? Is that detection behaving the way we expect it to? And so this ability to work this into a pipeline, test your detections as you're developing them, iterate on it, see how they're behaving, is critical for detection strategies in general. But if we dig into what these attack sessions are, this is what makes the like ML part of my brain really tingle, is these attack sessions. We call them attack sessions or threats. So what you're looking at here is from the platform, and it's an example of 4 different ways of doing a particular technique. That technique is called service creation or scheduled service creation, and it's used for persistence, right? And so a hacker went through and they did a VM session that was captured with 4 different ways of doing this, and then uploaded it, and they got a timeline and a video capture of their desktop. And they went through and they dropped red stars down on the timeline where they executed the techniques of interest. And then for every red star, they had the opportunity to, through an interface, to label one of the log lines or process good or leave it as a timestamp label. So we get really detailed labels of where things happen in the logs, not just like in the timestamps. And then these can be enriched with like MITRE ATT&CK tags. You can see this. We've got a free community edition. Just you can sign up for a login right there. And then we have this particular example, which is what we're talking about today, mining for signatures of in the registry. This is the actual attacks that we use. So you can check those out on the platform. Right. So this is labeled data. This is awesome. What do we do with this? One of the things besides this just being labeled data, there's other stuff other than like strictly speaking supervised ML we can do with it. And one is to recognize that we have an attack or an example of a behavior and detections that are supposed to detect them. And when we have a validated hit, there's a connection between the two. And that makes a bipartite graph. So I took all 7,000 data points in our data set and constructed the graph out of it. And whoops, that's not right. 1 second. There we go. And I put it in this presentation, and marketing graphics said, you can't do that. It looks terrible. And so here's a better representation, like a nice clean representation of kind of what it looks like. But this subgraph here is accurate. This is one of the communities we pulled out of it. So once you have a graph, you can start doing community detection and pull out all these like clusterings of behaviors. And I dug into this. This is purely data driven and like sort of graph connection driven. And I started digging into these communities to find out what are they. And like this one, which is sticky keys exploits. So everything in here is either a detection or an attack example of user accessibility exploits or in order to achieve higher privileges. And so it correlates to this particular MITRE ATT&CK sub-technique. And that's true across the whole data set. These behaviors start to manifest once you connect things as a graph. And there's other cool things you can do with this, like, it's all enriched, so you can start calculating MITRE ATT&CK coverage given a set of detections. You can do similarity calculations by projecting this bipartite graph onto either the attacks or the defense side. And of course, as a graph, you can pull out machine learning features, which is TBD. I'm looking forward to seeing what I can do with that, but we haven't gotten there yet. Okay, so that's the data and the data perspective. We have all this labeled data. We have ways of collecting examples of behavior and logging them and labeling them well. And so what do we do with this? This is our case study. So we were reading through Jared Atkinson's SpectraOps blog, and he has a post playing detection with a full deck. And in it, he is concerned with detecting how are we doing on top of fine? Detecting malicious service creation, which is a method for establishing persistence on a box. If you've hacked a box and you want to be able to live there, when it's reset, you'll lose all your access unless you set up something like a scheduled service to start up your remote access tool when the box resets itself. And so that's what this is. It's a way of establishing persistence. And you would want to find malicious examples of this kind of behavior. But if you're going to do that, you have to be able to find, identify, if you want to, so his quote was, if your detection goal is to identify malicious scheduled task creation, you must first be able to identify all scheduled task creation. So you have to be able to understand the base condition, all the different circumstances under which this could happen if you want to successfully detect it. And he, using his expertise as a threat hunt expert, looked through what happens on a box when you execute these different ways of scheduling a service. And he found that this registry key is always touched whenever that happens. And so he said, this is the base condition. This is what we can start with in terms of developing a detection to find malicious cases of this. And this excited us because we've really wanted to work with registry data because it's, it works across Windows boxes. It's much more robust against attacker variants, right? It's low-level OS activity that's being registered. And so if you can figure out what it means, then you can detect things, even if attackers are doing things like changing file names, padding binaries to change hashes and that sort of thing. So this has been a goal for a while. And so we're like, okay, if he can do this, maybe we can do this automatically. He's given us a particular case that we can try and reproduce. And so we go about trying to automatically answer his question is, can you discover this base condition? Okay, so actually hunting in the registry, how did we do it? So we had Tim Nary, one of the founders, helped us out by writing a script that would go through and, can I laser point on here? No, okay. Execute one of these methods randomly on a box and vary the timing of these scheduled service creations and the service names to add some randomness in it. And every time a service was created, we recorded this timestamp. And so we have a whole bunch of timestamps. And then we pulled in a time window around that timestamp all the sysmon event logs 12, 13, and 14. Those are registry key creations, deletions, or modifications. And we're agnostic as to which of those it is. We really just want to find out which of these keys is being touched. And so this is our data set, these time windowed boxes of registry keys. And our goal is to mine them and discover correlations or patterns, which would tell us what keys are associated with this behavior or combinations of keys. So we also ran some user behavior in the background. So it wasn't just one activity going on. And in the end, we ran for 17 hours and got 364,000 events, of which there's 80 to 89,000 unique keys. This follows kind of Zipf's law for language, right? Like there's a lot of keys that show up a lot, and then most of the rest of the stuff is fairly unique. So you can't really do item set mining on that if all your events are unique, like there's no patterns to find. So we have to solve this problem. So this is an example of some of the keys that were in our time windows. And you can see there's clearly patterns here, right? If you as a human saw this, you would say, these are all connected. We want these to all be registered probably the same. And if they show up in our time windows, if any of them do, we want to know that and pull that out. And so we normalize these by going through and finding these unique identifiers like service IDs, process IDs, program IDs, et cetera, and just replacing them with tokens. And I did this just by staring at Windows registry logs for a long time and writing regexes. And so this is what it looks like after we normalize that and truncate some of these keys because they're very long. That gets us down to about 28,000 unique keys. But still, this is a pattern we would want to pull out. We would want these to be associated with each other. So how do we do that? And our answer is we start clustering this. Once we normalize the keys, we start to cluster them so that we can use the cluster IDs rather than the key strings themselves as the identifiers for the item set mining. And so the strategy for this was to just treat each of these registry paths as each element is an item in a set, pull them out and use the Jacquard distance, which is nice because, so in this case, right, these are long strings with just one differing, once you normalize them, one differing element at the end. So there's 5 common elements, 7 total. And so the distance metric I've set up here is 0.3, right? So this is pretty close. And when you contract these keys down, like if you have short keys that differ by 1, they're further apart. So this respects the kind of hierarchy you find in the registry. So that intuitively made sense to me, and it seems to have worked well. These are examples of clusters from that. And so we go through the logs and we just, whenever we find a key, we replace it with the closest cluster. And that brings us down to 7,000 unique items in our data set for item set mining, which is a 92% reduction and makes item set mining actually feasible in this case to find the signatures for these attacks within these time windows. So what did we catch? So here, item set mining, right? It's like, what are the most prevalent combinations of clusters, of items within those time windows? And so they're in terms of the cluster IDs. And we ran a negative baseline here. So these are the most common cluster IDs in data without any service creations. And we removed them from the top hits in item set mining from the actual data run. And that leaves you with just that top cluster there, cluster number 1, which is actually the correct key. So this is, it's got a string in there that's the service name that was randomized, but then that cluster is showing up at the top of the list as the culprit. And so in this case, for an example, right, if you did this in the wild, this would be like somebody hands you an attack. Hey, how do I get traction on this? You run a script that simulates its attack, collect registry data around those attacks, run the normalization scheme and clustering, and then do your mining and look at what comes out on top and subtract out the baseline. So that's sort of the general methodology we're trying to validate here, and it seems to work in this case. And so you would hand this key off to your analysts or your threat detection engineers and say, this is your starting point. This will detect all cases of this behavior. And your job is just to reduce false positives and find out how do we tell it's actually malicious when this happens. So this is an excellent starting point. And so what did we take away from this? One is being able to have scripts coded up for these techniques and behaviors is essential. And the more parameters you allow people to vary within those scripts, like, if there's command line options that don't matter, if there's timings or parameter names that can be changed, like make those as options in the script to change so you can represent that variance in the data when you simulate it. The Atomic Red team kind of does this. They just don't have, they have good examples of attacks. They just don't have parameters that you can change as easily. So this attack as code is important for this. 2, looking at this, the thing I'm most excited about this is the registry data processing, because registry data is so hard to work with. And so I think this is a reusable technique, right? It's a way of normalizing and processing this data such that the hierarchy and simulators that are in these keys are manifest, and you're not dealing with like a million unique keys. And it's not this like, I would hate to run an LSTM over this stuff. I just don't know what would happen. So I'm not going to do that. I like this a little bit better until proven differently. Although it's expensive, right? And that's so is frequent item set mining. And arguably in this case, we could have just done a value count across them and we would have gotten the same answer. So in the future, we'll explore that and see where is frequent item set actually worth it. And it would be in the case that you have more complicated behavior that involves multiple keys. This would be able to pull those up and bubble up those combinations of keys where value counts might not be able to. So that's an open question here. And just a reminder, we have, if you want to check out our data, you can check out the community edition. We have lots of detections and attacks on there. And we have this one in particular that you can take a look at and see what detections hit it. What do the log entries look like? How is everything enriched? Yeah, so that's it. I should credit a key to this work is our some of our founders, Frey, who helped formulate this problem, and Nary, who helped a lot with simulating the attacks. So, okay, any questions?